Last night, there was a special election to replace Pompeo, Congressman Pompeo, who has now become the CIA director appointed by Donald Trump. Now, the interesting thing about this race, it was won by the Republican. What was interesting was how close this race was. Is there trouble with the GOP base? They point out the victory Tuesday night did not come as easily as many expected. This is a deep red state. Now, this was a victory with 7 percentage points. But remember, this is a district where Pompeo won election just last November by 31 points. Trump won there by 27 points. They point out Republicans outnumbered Democrats by 2-1 in this district, yet he only won by 7 points. And this was something that was pulled out at the last minute. They were very worried about this. This is something that should have been a slam dunk, shouldn't it? And yet they had the president and the vice president recording robocalls. They had Ted Cruz go there to campaign for him on Monday at the last minute, and they had the National Republican Congressional Caucus flooding television with abortion ads that were aimed at the Democrat opponent. They point out the flurry of this activity from national Republicans in an usually safe Republican seat attracted national attention. And next Tuesday, we have some more elections to fill people who have been moved to Washington to take place in the Trump administration. There are going to be some elections in Georgia in the 6th district, and they say that this is going to be pretty much an all-party race, and there's a lot of concern about this, that it might go in any direction. This is an even riskier race. Why is this happening? Well, it's because we're seeing a lot of infighting within the GOP House. We're seeing a lot of infighting in the White House administration. People are concerned about the agenda. As the Hill puts it, GOP infighting is imperiling their agenda. They said 3 months into the new Congress, some Republicans are fearful that their failure to repeal Obamacare could spell doom for the rest of President Trump's legislative agenda. Some Capitol Hill Republicans have envisioned a nightmare scenario for 2017 and 2018 when the midterm elections will happen. What if there's no Obamacare repeal? What if there is no tax reform? What if there's no trillion-dollar infrastructure bill, or maybe even no border wall? They say it's a striking change from Election Day, where everybody said they were going to go big, go bold. And we look at the focus of this, and of course, it still goes back to Obamacare. And there was a comment about Mark Meadows, who is head of the House Freedom Caucus. Remember that the establishment Republicans, Paul Ryan and others, went to war with the House Freedom Caucus, who stood firmly on the campaign promises that had been made repeatedly to the American people that they would do Obamacare repeal. Nevertheless, President Trump, who also promised the same thing, sided with Paul Ryan, who has consistently failed to even try before President Trump got there. As a matter of fact, a month before the election, remember, we had Paul Ryan throw President Trump under the bus as a candidate when the Billy Bush tape came out. He said, forget him, save yourselves. He's not going to make it, just work on your own stuff. Whereas Mark Meadows, specifically, the same people that Trump has gone to war with over this, were the ones who stood by him and said the only way that we're going to get this agenda that we've been promising the American people is if we get a President Trump and he stands with us. So now we've got an anonymous congressman on the House saying that Mark Meadows is, quote, a pathological liar who isn't interested in getting to a yes vote. Now, he said that anonymously. But another person who is a member of the House Freedom Caucus, Raul Labrador from Idaho, said this. He said, Meadows is a man of integrity. When members of Congress resort to personal attacks while hiding behind anonymity, it's usually because their position is weak in the first place and they're getting heat back home for not keeping the promises that they made to their constituents in order to get elected. He nailed it. That's exactly what is going on. These people who don't want to produce on what they ran on are now trying to attack the individuals who are trying to stand with their campaign promises to repeal Obamacare. It's not enough to adjust it around the edges. You can't say we're going to leave the mandates in place. That's what the essential health benefits are. You can't say you're going to do that, just put lipstick on it and expect people to fall for that. We're not going to fall for that. We've been lied to too many times by the Republicans. Justin Amash said we either need a new change in direction from this speaker or we need a new speaker. And I think one of the things that's very interesting is this Paul Ryan bill. Remember, the Obamacare bill was AHCA, Affordable Health Care Act. The Republicans came up with a great new idea. They called it the American Health Care Act. It's still called AHCA. Isn't that interesting? They changed it from affordable to American. Tried to put a little bit of lipstick on it, But we all know that it's not affordable. And it is totally un-American. Obamacare is a mixture of socialism and fascism. It's a mixture of welfare, subsidies, and massive taxes combined with crony capitalism. There is nothing about that needs to be saved. And the mechanism that was put forth by Paul Ryan, that was signed onto by President Trump to have a second phase where the dictatorial powers that had been given to the Health and Human Secretary, that those would be used to do some reforms. You cannot leave the basic structure in place. And the only way that healthcare is going to be affordable is if you make a market out of it, if you give people the power to make economic decisions and the information and the competition to make those decisions themselves. Otherwise, what you're going to have is Venezuelan care. And one of the things they point out with this is they said it's essential that they get some of this American Health Care Act in because it would get rid of about $1 trillion in Obamacare taxes. See, that's the transfer of wealth from one group to the other. What we need is affordable health care. Universal health coverage is not achievable under any system. Utopia is not an option. The best thing that we can do is make healthcare the best that it can be, the most affordable that it can be. And the way you do that is with competition, information, and economic ability, not by stealing people's money and giving it to somebody else, not by holding a gun to people's head and forcing them to buy something from a company that they otherwise would not want to do. That fundamentally is unconstitutional. Even if the Supreme Court has said that it is, it still remains unconstitutional. Now, it's not just infighting on the House, that is on Capitol Hill, inside the House there, but it's also infighting that's going on in the White House. We saw today that Donald Trump met with a New York Post reporter with whom he is very comfortable, and he had this to say about what's going on with Steve Bannon. He said, "I like Steve, but you have to remember he was not involved in my campaign until very late. I had already beaten all the senators and all the governors, and I didn't know Steve. I'm my own strategist, and it wasn't like I was going to change strategies because I was facing crooked Hillary. Steve is a good guy, but I told them to straighten it out or I will." Well, who is them? Well, of course, that's a competition between Kushner and Bannon. This is a competition not just between a couple of personalities, however. This is a competition of ideology. This is why very early in the administration, Steve Bannon was focused on by the mainstream media. For a week, they singled him out. They tried to make it look like he was the person who was running the White House to create this kind of resentment with Donald Trump. We found out later that Kushner was sending a lot of emails and messages to Joe Scarborough at MSNBC, and it was at the end of the week that Saturday Night Live did the vicious parody that we know that Donald Trump pays a great deal of attention to those things, and it makes it, for some reason, makes a lot of difference to him. And his son-in-law knows that. And so he's in constant communication with Joe Scarborough. On the following Monday on MSNBC, Joe Scarborough played it on Morning Joe, the Saturday Night Live skit, and they were laughing about it. And within 1 hour, Donald Trump reacted to it with an angry tweet. They know how to push his buttons. They know how to put Bannon out there to try to embarrass and humiliate Donald Trump, to say that he's the one who's running this. The reality is that it's Kushner who's doing this. It's Kushner that is playing this type of game. And as they say, what was said on the New York Post, they say Bannon allies inside and outside the White House were taken by surprise with Goodwin's column, and they're distraught. They said Bannon allies are bitter about the role they believe economic advisor Gary Cohen, who is the ally of Jared Kushner, the Goldman Sachs lifelong Democrat, like Jared Kushner. Gary Cohen has played this role in undercutting their guy with the president. In private conversations, they call Gary Cohen Globalist Gary. In text messages, the shorthand is Carbon Tax Cohen, or a simple emoji, a globe for globalist. And to give you another idea of how the mainstream media is joining along with the comedy shows, joining along with the Goldman Sachs and his son-in-law to push anybody who stands for the agenda that Donald Trump ran on and won on, Elliott Abrams, the guy who was always a never-Trumper, the guy who opposed Donald Trump and immediately jumped on his side as he shot off missiles. Elliott Abrams is still attacking Steve Bannon, saying he's not a good influence on the president. No, of course not, because he wants to deconstruct the administrative state. He wants to drain the swamp, and the swamp is fighting back. Elliott Abrams said, get rid of Steve Bannon. That is step number one. This is the guy who said after the strikes, now we have a guy who is president. Finally, after a couple of months, finally now, he is leader of the world. See, he wanted a globalist world leader. And now he is trumpeting that. And of course, Elliott Abrams was pushed forward by Jared Kushner to Donald Trump for a State Department position. Donald Trump was wise enough to say no. But these people are still putting pressure on Donald Trump. To give you an idea of how this is running with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, remember that when they're talking about Obamacare, they brought in the architect of Obamacare, Rahm Emanuel, Zeke Emanuel, brother of Rahm Emanuel, and he was saying it's not going to be repealed. We might make some small changes, but it's not going to be repealed. Then, of course, Gary Cohen brought in Quinn, who was the architect of TPP, even though Donald Trump shut down TPP immediately as these people are coming into the administration. Remember, Trump's administration is not completely filled out yet. As these people are coming in, they're bringing in the architect of Obamacare, the architect of TPP to stop any reform of NAFTA. We've had another Goldman Sachs person, Diana Habib Powell, who is a very close confidant of Ivanka. She is an Egyptian. She's being brought in to school Donald Trump on foreign policy for the globalists. And then when it comes to climate change, we had a lot of very positive movements in terms of the EPA, in terms of Scott Pruitt, who was put in there, pushing back against the expansion of the EPA. But then at the last minute, they pushed back and said, we're not going to say anything about the endangerment clause, which is the foundation for what the EPA is doing in terms of expanding itself, shutting down entire industries, rewarding and subsidizing other industries, and pushing this entire climate change agenda to make themselves more powerful. No, they're not going to do anything with the endangerment clause. They're not going to do anything with this Paris Climate Treaty, which was put in by executive order, never ratified by the Congress, but it remains there as a framework. Why did that happen? Because Ivanka pushed back against that. She's close friends with Justin Trudeau. She does not want to be embarrassed before her globalist friends. And this is the bottom line. As we've reported before, as Axios has talked about this, they said there's two crucial words to describe what's going on. It used to be that it was going to be nationalism versus globalism. Now what we see is it's combat versus collaboration. Don't resist the Goldman Sachs globalists. Don't have anything to say. Play nice with them. Don't combat them. Collaborate with them. If you collaborate with them, you can say, here's how the GOP and Donald Trump can avoid defeat in these coming elections and in the midterm elections. Basically, they can do what they said they would do. That's what they needed. They won on that. They put together a winning coalition on that. They need to dance with the one that brought them here. It's a winning agenda. They won on that. They should stand on that while they still have a majority, while they can still do something. Keep the promises you made to get elected. Remember, going back to Wag the Dog, which we went back and looked at, the slogan there to keep their guy in there, don't change horses in midstream. Well, that was actually an Abraham Lincoln slogan. And if you want to see a good example of where this might lead, think about the fact that he promised that we would get a judge that was close to Scalia. It appears that we have that with Justice Gorsuch. We want to continue with those types of victories. And it's interesting, I think, that we're going to see very quickly whether or not this is going to be the kind of judge that we wanted to see. Of course, we've had President Reagan make some good appointments. He appointed Judge Scalia, but then he also appointed Justice Kennedy. And we have seen a lot of surprises in Supreme Court judges. So we're going to find out pretty soon whether or not Gorsuch is the man that we've been sold. There are some cases that are going to be coming up. 3, as a matter of fact. New American points this out. There's going to be one of these will be the denial by the state of Missouri to a church's request to participate in a grant program that offered recycled tires to various nonprofits in the state. They have a nonprofit where they operate a child learning center, which is not a religious system, but because the church is peripherally involved, the state does not want to have that request honored, so they want to shut them out of that. Also, tomorrow, the court will decide whether or not to review an appeal that involves a business being forced to bake a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. So that will be very interesting to see whether that case comes up and is reviewed in the Supreme Court. The third case will be Peruta versus San Diego County. It is a Second Amendment issue involving a city's restrictions on obtaining concealed carry permits. They say those who apply must show a good cause and has to distinguish the applicant from the ordinary citizens. And you have to prove somehow that you, when you're applying for a concealed carry, that you are somehow in harm's way. See, it's a privilege. It's not a right. We have to understand that the Second Amendment makes it very clear, doesn't it, that our rights will not be infringed. That means you will not gradually take them over by moving the fence a little bit onto my property, and then after we leave it there for a while, you move it a little bit further on. That's the way you take my property, is by gradual infringement. That is what they've done, and they've now turned our fundamental right to protect ourselves, which does not come from government, it comes from God. We possess that as individual people. Our freedom and dignity depends on our ability to be able to protect ourselves. The Second Amendment was a prohibition against the government infringing on that, a recognition of those fundamental rights. And the government over and over again has turned these into privileges, which they grant or they take away very easily. So we'll see what is happening with that. And of course, there's questions now asked about whether or not Justice Kennedy will soon retire. Let's hope so. Let's hope that we get a good replacement for him as well. Stay with us. We're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about the new slave state that you are a part of.
This is one of the biggest secrets out there. The missing link of why our ancestors, whether you were in Africa or ancient Albion, which is England today, why our ancestors were so much stronger. I mean, there are huge archaeological reports, all sorts of anthropology studies, you can look them up for yourself, that show that humans, just an average farmer of 10,000 years ago in England, was stronger than Olympic athletes today. In the final equation, everyone knows our modern society has lost its vitality. The sperm counts are down like 90%. People are falling apart. They're totally depressed. They're unhappy. What is going on? Every ancient culture was obsessed with what I'm about to reveal to you. Today we call it bone broth, and for thousands of years our ancestors enjoyed its benefits before it became lost to our modern diets of processed junk. That's why I'm so excited to announce the product that is undoubtedly the jewel in the crown of InfoWars Life products. Caveman. We lost our vitality because we just ignored the ancient traditions. Everyone knew that you used all the parts of the animal. You used the skin to cover yourself or for shelter. You used the meat for sustenance, the fat for cooking, but you used the bones for strength. We are now introducing Caveman by InfoWarsLife.com, the ultimate in true paleo nutrition with bone broth, turmeric root, chaga mushroom, and 7 total primal superfoods in a single great tasting formula. The bone is so amazing. From the outside structure full of minerals and key cofactors to the marrow that produces the blood for the body. This is the engine of the life essence. I've made a lot of important points here, but this is the one you need to research for yourself because it's so key. High-quality bone broth helps support healthy muscles and connective tissue, while the active compounds in turmeric do battle on the cellular level and help fight free radicals. And collagen is essential to aid healthy tendons, ligaments, and muscle tissue. This is an absolute win-win. You get an amazing product produced right here in America. You support InfoWars and all we're doing to promote freedom and the restoration of our republic and promotion of freedom worldwide. The journey towards better health and giving our bodies these amazing compounds that God created starts at InfoWarsLife.com. 3 years in the making, incredible research, and the very best ingredients. I'm Alex Jones, and I may not be a caveman, but compared to these trendies out there in the street, I'm as close as it gets. Join me at InfoWarsLife.com and get your caveman formula today.